Hello and welcome back to the Renewables podcast. We are back again with another very special episode with some superstar guests. But before we get to them, there's my co-host Sam.
Oh.
How are you, mate?
I'm not a superstar guest anymore.
No, you're not. You're just here.
No, I'm really good. Bit of a frantic one getting here today, but I'm really excited about this one. So much to talk about, and I think we're going to struggle to fit it all in the sort of 45, 50-minute time frame. But yeah, really looking forward to it. But yeah, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks. Same as you, busy in the day job. We've been commissioning 22 car chargers this morning, and they're currently all not online, and my life is very painful. But that's another issue. For those who can see the camera angle over here, you will see that we've got Michael Peace from the IET with us. So how are you, Michael?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Nice to have you with us. I'm doing well, and it's good that you've taken the time to come and visit us.
Pleased
At
to
the
be
Apprentice One-to-One Academy, it's not local to anyone, so we do appreciate you taking the effort.
No, thank you for the opportunity.
We've also got Graham Kenyon, who sat over with Sam. How are you, Graham?
Very good, thank you.
Excellent that you could come along as well, again, over from the other side of the country.
Got my passport out.
Yeah, that's it. Brought us a stick of rock and
From
everything.
Lancashire to Yorkshire.
So we've come together on this one to try and explain a little bit about what the IET is and what these developments that have happened of late. We've had the draft for public comment come out, and we've also had the pass and the involvement that the IET has and hasn't had within that, because there's some misconceptions around all of that, and Michael and Graham are going to help us get to all of that. So I thought the first off is to kind of set out what the IET is in both this huge thing that it is, but also the smaller part of it really, that is the team of technical people there.
Yeah, would you like me to go with that?
Yeah, you want
no
to pick
problem.
Up that one, Michael?
Yeah, so you know about the history of the IET as the IEE as it was, or even before then the Society of Telegraph Engineers. There's a long history of the wiring regulations that the IET used to be responsible for. Now, in the 90s, 91, it changed to a British standard. So our role now is to manage the committee. So it used to be called the secretary of the committee. It's now called the committee manager. So the IET are responsible for managing the committees. Now, what that involves is producing the agendas, taking the minutes, doing all the background work, if you like. But primarily, the IET are a charity. When I first joined the IET, I remember seeing this big building in Stevenage, and I knew there was 500 people work there. I walked in the building and I said, I can't believe all these people work on the wiring regulations. And my boss sort of laughed and he said, no, I'll take you to the people that write the wiring regulations, or manage the people that write the wiring regulations, I should say. And he showed me this row of seats, and there was 5 seats there, and that's all there is. There's 5 of us in the technical regulations team. There's 4 subcommittees to JPEL64. One of us manage each of one of the subcommittees, A, B, C and D. And then we've got Mark, who's the committee manager of JPEL64. And then we've also got the old the previous secretary of JPEL64, which is Jeff Cronshaw. And he's sort of part-time now, only 2 days a week. So there's kind of 6 of us, but like I say, Jeff's only part-time. So
there's a small group of you there as the sphere. The referees are like to term you amongst. Is that fair, that you're kind of in there?
I'd say the chairs are more the referees than the committee managers. Yeah, they get the job of sort of dealing. We do all the work in the background. And
okay. So you're the ones behind the scenes doing all the legwork. And Graham, whilst you're not an employee of the IET, you are intrinsically associated with them because of all the publications that you're involved with and the writings that you do. But set out your involvement with that as well, if you can.
So the IET is a chartered professional engineering institution. The professional engineering institutions each have a royal charter, and that's what governs them as an independent professional body. And I'm a member of the IET and a chartered engineer. And I'm actually one of I think I was in the last tranche of people to get the Chartered Electrical Engineer certificate, which suits me, but it didn't suit everybody. Because I joined just on the cusp of the IEE, the Institution of Electrical Engineers as it was, transforming into the Institution of Engineering and Technology that it is today. My background is mainly major infrastructure in the transport sector, and I did an awful lot of assurance type work, making sure that we meet legislation requirements of the contract and so on, and all of our suppliers. And I've been involved in writing standards since around about 2004-ish. I got involved with JPEL64 when they were writing the new bits for the 17th edition that came in 2008 for electromagnetic compatibility and surge protection. So if I wasn't on your hates list, probably there now. And I've represented the Chartered Institution of Building Services Engineers and the Institution of Engineering and Technology as a technical expert on JPEL64, and also and its subcommittees, and also international standards committees as well. I currently chair JPEL64 and have for a few years chaired Subcommittee D. So we've got subcommittees A, B, C and D. A looks after bits of the introduction, some general requirements that cut across all installations like earthing and identification and notices and that kind of stuff, and inspection and testing. Subcommittee B mainly looks after cabling and fire protection and the thermal performance of cables. C mainly looks at protection against electric shock, and D looks after special locations and things like electromagnetic compatibility and surge protection and all, you know, what the stuff that people would say, well, that's on the too hard pile. And what that means actually is that Subcommittee D has some very, very clever, really clever industry experts, which does cause interesting discussions and arguments. But actually, they bring a wealth of expertise that you very rarely get these days. It's really great to be part of that subcommittee.
Yeah.
So, being the chair, you are independent. The chair can make proposals and so on, but really it's to be independent of all of the institutions and other bodies that are represented in the committees, and help people to reach a consensus, to help people to write standards according to the rules for writing standards. People might wonder why the wiring regulations are written like the law. Well, it's because that's how you have to write standards. We use the words that we do in a particular way, not to make it difficult to read, but actually to help people understand the meaning and the intent behind what we write.
I think for me, and probably for a lot of people watching or listening to this, that first question of what is the IET, who are the IET, that for me is one that before this I wouldn't be able to answer, because you kind of see the IET on the books and everything, and you forget that there's people behind that are associated with like a company or a body. So is it necessarily? You mentioned it was a charity.
The IET is a charity. Yeah.
So what I take from that, and I might have completely missed the mark with this, is that effectively the IET kind of almost like collects people in these subcommittees that look at certain topics to then write the code of practices or to...
Yeah, I mean, as part of the IET's charitable aims, it's to further the practice of electrical engineering and electrical science. Is I think the way it's worded, isn't it, in the aims of the institution in the Royal Charter, and so we are there to help not just make things safe, but also think about how we meet the other objectives the Engineering Council sets, like sustainability and that kind of thing. So the IET doesn't just publish in the area of the wiring regulations that it developed back in the 1880s originally, but it also publishes in many, many other topic areas amongst the wealth of experience and the massive range of disciplines that its members work in, from software through to some of the more hardcore.
Yeah. I mean, that's it.
non-select stuff, you know.
It's a big beast when it's got the technology aspect bolted on now, isn't it? It really is. It's like vast beyond just what we would term as our industry. And I think there's a few misconceptions that are out there with installers that because the IET's logo's on the front of these books, we spoke about this before, that it's all your work, it's all you're doing, and that perhaps some of the people who work within the IET are not electricians who are out experiencing this day to day. And I think that's unfair. I think that's a myth we can bust.
Yeah, well,
right now.
I can say that all of the 5 people that are in the technical, well, 6 including Jeff, the 6 people that are in the technical regulations team, we're all time served electricians. We all come from that background. None of us took the academic route. So yeah, we are. I think the point to take from this is, and I know we get the blame for everything that's in the book, and I've kind of learned to live with that, to be honest with you. But if you want, if the people that actually are responsible for the technical content can be found in what I call the "Who's to Blame" section at the front of the book.
Yeah, I would just say to that that I would count myself in the camp of believing that, basically that myth that you've just outlined there, because I think as busy electricians or business owners and whatever, you all that sort of side of it passes you by. You kind of think, well, the name's on the book. It's their fault that I say fault. It's trying to improve things. It's not a negative thing. But if there's anything that you don't agree with or anything, you kind of say it's the IT's fault and what have you. Whereas actually, it's a group of people that have come together to try and better things. And
I think it's worth saying as well, Sam, that when we have to reach what we call consensus, which means we don't all agree. Well, we don't all have to agree, I should say, but it means there's a lack of sustained objection. So while a proposal might have gone in saying one thing, someone else will want totally the opposite. We'll have to meet in the middle to get consensus. So it's an agreement, and that's how it works. That's committee work.
So if you have 10 people that have been involved with that new publication, it might be that actually half of them, or maybe all of them, didn't get what they want, but they all met somewhere in the middle.
Yes.
So actually, none of them, if you were to chat to any one member of that 10, for example, they might all say, yeah, I didn't agree with that bit. And for me and you, Mark, as well, I know you probably have a little bit more involvement with this sort of stuff than me, but you look at that list and you go, every single one of them has decided that, and that they are backing that, but actually they've tried to come to a consensus, and I know that's what we've been talking a little bit off camera about, and that was, I never even thought about that. I thought it was literally they fought it out to the death until they all absolutely agreed.
It might be like that, really.
There was actually 12 people on that list, but 2 of them didn't make it, kind of thing.
The other thing that's worth pointing out as well, Sam, well, a couple of things. The first thing is, as Graham will tell you, if we get 10 of us in a room, there'll be at least 11 opinions. We'll all be totally different. But the other thing to remember is, with what goes in the book, as in probably, I'm guessing here, 95% probably, it's not developed homegrown. It's all implemented from the harmonised documents. Right. So all these agreements have already been reached at European and before that at international level. So when it comes to us, we get a new international document, and bearing in mind all ours is in one book, but internationally they're all separately. So all the Part 7s are separate, Part 1's separate, Part 4, Part 5. So we have to then, once we get the harmonised document, we look at it in the UK and say, is this suitable for us? We can tweak it as such, but we still have to adopt the technical intent. So we can change the wording slightly to make it a little bit more understandable, but we still have to adopt the technical intent.
Right, okay. So even, and not politically, but even coming out of Europe and everything like that, has that give you any more flexibility with any of that, or is it literally just...
Not at all.
Right.
So, if we look at at standards as a whole, nations within CENELEC, which is the Organisation for Electrotechnical Standardisation that covers not just the EU but also some appendant countries as well, like Scandinavia and one or two other countries that subscribe, and of course the UK now. So CENELEC is more than just the EU, and we're not just talking about the wiring regulations, BS 7671 here. We're talking about product standards. Now, the premium that we pay for having a UK plug on something, because it's an international market now, is a few quid an appliance. over the same appliance in the EU, because typically they'll use a common type plug. There are, and the maths for that is quite simple. There's the whole of Germany, the whole of Austria, the whole of France, and so on, that have a similar plug. That's many times more. Each one of those countries has a rough population of, roughly the size of the UK-ish. Some slightly bigger, some slightly smaller. So the simple massive economic supply and demand. We have a unique plug. There's a cost to that as well, on top of that, but there's also this uniqueness. It needs something different doing. So we pay a premium for having that difference. So it actually doesn't benefit anybody for the UK necessarily to have a different way of making a laptop power supply than anybody else in Europe.
So it's more it's almost like more the Senelec, I think I'm pronounced that right, Senelec membership, more so than the actual European Union membership. It's actually, we've come out of that, but we're still part of the Senelec.
Yes.
But there are some good reasons for that, and the government doesn't want to sever ties with Senelec.
Right.
And that is because the cost of everything would just shoot through the roof. Because we'd have to have unique UK stuff, and eventually they've even got to the point of saying now the UK CA mark that was replacing the CE mark probably won't do. I think the latest guidance that we've had, the latest information, is that the CE mark will continue for the at least the foreseeable future to be allowed to be permitted. And that just makes a lot of sense, really, because we haven't made massive changes to standards. There are also national differences within Senelec standards. There's a table of differences. If I was to pull out the electric vehicle charging equipment standard, for certain clauses there are notes saying in France you must have a shutter. If you've got a socket outlet, it must be shuttered. And we have UK national requirements in.
So basically, you can be part of Senelec, but you can have slight differences within, like our plugs and things like that.
Absolutely,
you can have differences, but then there must be, and this is probably a whole other podcast. I feel like I'm unraveling a massive, but you can have differences within this. But I'm assuming there are certain things that have to be the same across it for it. Otherwise, it's not.
In the wiring regs, for example, so in HD, the harmonised document that the wiring regulations is based on, 60364-7-701, that's our bathrooms, section 701. There is a UK exception that talks about socket outlets 2.5 metres have to be installed 2.5 metres from the edge of zone 1, and that is written in there as a UK special because we are the only country that still makes a bit of a splash about sockets in bathrooms.
Yeah. It's probably worth explaining the format of that, Sam. So when we're developing the international documents, so it starts at IEC, so it's international across the whole of the world, and then it goes down to Senelec. But what we can do is we can request what's called a special national condition. It's really confusing because at Senelec it's SNC, it's a special national condition, but IEC it's SCN, it's a some countries note. And how I remember it is we don't have to adopt the IEC, but we do the Senelec, so it's a condition, not just a note. That's how I remember it the right way around. But while we're developing the document, the UK can say, right, we're not subscribing to that. We need an SCN for that. Sorry, an SNC.
You cut yourself out.
So yeah, I do all the time, and a lot of people do actually.
Yeah.
So we can say we can propose new text for that regulation. So if you look in the back of an international document, you'll see all the special national conditions or some countries' notes, depending on what document you're looking at, and that will list all of the differences that we've requested during the development stage, and then we can implement that into BS 7671.
We've had a few examples of things moving a little bit more quickly than that. So you do have some kind of autonomy to make changes, such as the corrigendum, the Amendment 3 that's coming now. Is that something that hasn't been passed down, but something you've decided as a committee? So
we can make things more onerous. As long as we don't change the general technical intent, we can put additional requirements in. We talk about our own. It may very well be that the harmonised documents don't go down to an appropriate level. So it might just, in terms of voltage drop, for example, they talk about, the harmonised document just talks about not impairing the function of equipment. with voltage drop. In the UK, of course, we have the electricity safety, quality and continuity regulations, and we know what the expected voltage ranges are, so that we've got a bit more detail in there, and we can put that detail in. Some of those things are covered by national conditions, others in international documents, and others aren't. They're just additional bits of information that we can put on. When we're looking at detecting whether something is homegrown or not, it actually depends on whether on when the requirements were written, and whether we are putting in unique UK only requirements, or whether they're embellished from what is in the harmonised document. However, if it is just a unique UK only requirement, it will have now a .201 number, but it isn't the same going back historically over the past 20 years. Say we've only been doing that for about 10 years, roughly, I think. So things that only that are unique to the UK will be a .201. Things
what I would say, Mark, is I would say I've heard the word emergency and urgent bandied about, and for me that's just clickbait. What I would say is
this for the Amendment 3?
Yes, yeah, I've seen that word bandied about a little bit, and the IET's had to release an
me.
urgent update. What I would say is I wouldn't use the word emergency or urgent. What I would say is there's a regular maintenance cycle of BS7671, shall we say. We're all used to a new book coming out, and what I would say is this wasn't envisaged as being part of the regular maintenance cycle, and following a discussion it was felt that it needed to come out more quickly than the regular maintenance cycle. So when a harmonised document's published, we only have a certain period before we have to adopt that within BS 7671. That is what dictates the maintenance cycle of BS 7671. It's not, as people say, the IET's bank's getting a little bit skimp, we need to sell some more books.
Yeah, I have used that in as a confession.
Yeah, no, I'm afraid it doesn't work like that. That'd be nice if it did.
I think we all have as installers, we've all taken those views. And you're damned if you do and damned if you don't, Toolpunks. You'll see the complaint, why does it take so long for the regs to catch up with where industry is? And then at the same time, when you're reacting a bit more quickly with this, Amendment 3 as we're seeing now, you get criticised, well, this has come out of nowhere, it's a bit fast, it's a bit quick, why is there only a month to comment on it, and all the rest of it? So you really can't win, can you?
No, well, I could answer that one about the month to comment. If you think when we release a full amendment, if you like, we get 3 months to comment on it, I would say there's a lot more than 3 times the amount of stuff to read, and so there's not much to analyse, to be fair. No. We won't get anywhere near as many comments. Just to give you an idea, a rough number on the Brown Book, when we were developing that, we got about 1,800 comments on that. And that takes a lot of time to get through at committee level. Whereas when I looked last, we had about 80 comments on this one regulation, so we're not doing too bad.
I think the one thing that maybe made it a little bit more suspicious on that is that it was just about there wasn't like a series of different parts to that amendment. It was just based on that one RCD element. So wasn't like there was the RCD thing and then something else and something else. It was all that one thing. So I think people have seen that as a bit more of like, well, why would you go to all this trouble just for one bit of a change of a regulation? It must be an emergency for it to be that small as a change.
Well, I think so. The first thing is it hasn't been that long ago since we put a corrigendum out with a few different items on. Why is this an amendment, not a corrigendum, is a good question. Yeah. Well, a corrigendum. A lot of these things come out of BS0, which is the standard for making standards.
Right.
There is actually a standard for standards makers,
and it's freely available to look if you're interested.
Yeah. Who writes the standards for standards makers, and what's the standard for writing the standard for standards? Well, there you go. All good questions, and it could get as nebulous as you want to. Just like who trains the trainer is the question in our industry, isn't it? Yeah. So, the thing is, there are these standards for uniformity and the way that changes are made to standards. And if you have a look in BS0, it is free to download. So, you can. I'm sure there'll be people watching this that will Google it just as I'm speaking this now and find out just to make sure that I'm right. But it does actually talk about the criteria for a corrigendum, and it's to correct errors in drafting. So if we look at this new this new amendment here, well, we didn't really have this requirement before. Yes, there are cautions. I think it really points at overcurrent protection in Chapter 82, saying just be careful, power might flow both ways, got to be a bit careful here, and take it into it. You shall take it into account. This is looking at a specific item, protective devices, or particular devices here, considering power can flow both ways where appropriate. So it's widening that a little bit, and it's a new requirement. It's nobody's putting their hands up and saying we've made an error, or in the drafting last time round, it's a new requirement. So it really is: do we do it now, or do we do it as part of the next major cycle? And if you think about it, there are implications, and the consensus is, if we can get this out quicker, let's do it. And that's what's happened. It's that simple.
So corrigendum correction and amendment is something new.
So
The wording in BS0 for a corrigendum is to correct errors that have been inadvertently introduced during the drafting process that could lead to unsafe or incorrect application.
Right.
I think I got that right, Graham.
Yeah. So I mean, this particular amendment is, yes, it leads to unsafe application, but it wasn't there before in this form. It's a new, and so the consensus here is that no, it's not corrigendum, it's not correction. We want to bring something new in here, and the only decision is: does it come now, or does it come as part of this major cycle? See how many comments we've got. How did you say 80 so far?
Last time I looked, at least 80.
It's been out a week and a half. We've got 80 comments, or a week and a day or something. We've got 80 comments. And so why does it take so long for us to actually make the larger amendments? Well, we've got all those comments to go through, but also we go through a cycle of proposals and comments internally as well, where we have look at the list in the front of the wiring regulations who's involved in the standard. There's lots and lots of members in the committees, so it takes a long time. Coming to an agreement what we do about those, and coming to what we do an agreement about what we do about all of the comments and suggestions that come in from the public comment process takes a lot of time.
I think it's a good thing that it's out there and it's been brought forward in that way. Is it something that's been brought to you by BEMA? Is that what's put this forward? Or is that something that was in discussion anyway?
BEMA did put a bulletin together. Now we don't talk about what goes on in those meetings. They're considered private. But a proposal was put forward to bring this amendment, and then it was agreed that the amendment would go forward. So, like I say, there was something published as a result of that. A representative or a represented organisation will have brought a proposal forward to suggest a change, and an agreement has been made by everybody involved that yes, we should do that.
It's raised a lot of awareness and discussion around the topic. I think it's actually quite an important one to get out there into the installer base. So having a lot of chat around it is no bad thing. We've actually got an opportunity now for anyone who's watching this to go off and comment. I've made some comments last night, and they might be different to what your comments would be, Craig, and yours, Michael. I think that's the mind hive of the electrical industry. I mean, sometimes people don't realise. I only recently learned, probably in the last 5 to 10 years, that we could actually comment on these things. I didn't know that you could do that, and I think there's still a lot of electricians out there who don't know. So if you're seeing this and you think it's a bad idea, or you want to suggest something else, then do get involved, because all of these comments are read. Is that that's what you're saying? These are all going to be looked at.
You can actually comment, introduce comments on the international documents as well. They're all put out for public comment. they'll be under IEC or HD 60364. On the standards development portal, if you look under JPEL64, they will be put out under JPEL64's banner, if you will, and you can submit comments on international documents as well, which is, as Michael pointed out earlier, that for some of the technical things that we think, why we're being made to do things this in a particular way, well, that would be the point, to actually get some of those technical questions
More
in.
at the origin of
The problem is, by the time we receive that harmonised document, it's almost too late. We almost have, like Graham said, we can change it slightly, but we have to adopt the technical intent. Whereas if we'd have received comments at a very early international stage, we could have changed the international document.
And that
So
would
when
have
it
changed
comes
it
to
for
BS 7671, it's just a matter of...
We don't bin those comments. I mean, it would be easy to say, oh, well, that's on the international document, let's bin them. What we actually do is we say, well, okay, well, we can't do anything about that right now, but next time the international document is being looked at, we put those in the mix.
I think then before I just on this topic, I've got a question that's come in from I think someone contacted you about this one, Matt. But before I put that to you both, I think it'd be good just to spend 2 minutes and just say, how do people actually go and comment both on this amendment? So if people want to comment directly on this amendment, and then on the international one, because I didn't realise you could even do the international one.
So,
how do you
the home for it is the BSI Standards Development Portal. So if you just type that into Google, that'll take you there.
Standardsdevelopment.bsigroup.com.
Is that and that's for the amendment 3?
That's everything.
Right.
So
You have to create an account, and then you can search for JPEL oblique stroke whatever you slash 64, and then that will tell you what's currently open for comment there.
Right.
And you can select them, so you can actually find this current amendment 3 that way, and anything else that's open for comment under JPEL64.
my suggestion, if you we'll touch on the DPC in a minute, but if you're looking for international documents, because I don't want to get too complicated with this, but they could either be a document that's developed at IEC, and that'll be developed in parallel with the CENELEC document. So it just gets developed in IEC and CENELEC just adopt it, or they could be run separately. So rather than people searching for IEC 60364 and HD 60364, just search for 60364 and everything will come up and you'll see all the latest documents. The last one, the period's closed now, but the last one that was up for comment that the viewers might be interested in is IEC 60364 Part 6, Inspection and Testing. We're currently working on that at international level. But what I would say is really important is we want as many people to get involved as possible. The more comments we get, the better a document it is, to be quite honest with you. But we don't want people to be, well, they can, they're more than welcome to, but if they just have a rant in the comment box and don't put anything in the proposal section, I'll just be honest and say what will happen at committee level. The word noted will just get written next to it and we'll just move on to the next comment. So if you do that, be really precise about what you want doing. Try and do as much of the work yourself as you can. So write the regulation in the box exactly as you would want to see it. My advice would be, don't try and make up words out of your own head. Try and use a similar language to what we've already got in the book.
That's all my comments just written off from last night.
One thing quickly on that, again, I'm trying and keep us on track, but it's really difficult and there's so much to talk about. But on that, how do you actually, well, once you create an account, do you get notified when there's stuff that is out to comment, or do you just have to literally search it?
Yeah, I believe you can. I believe that there might be a button on there that you can tell it to notify. I can't remember exactly. I don't use that function myself because obviously I get notified through the IEC and the
I think that would be a really good improvement. Would be effectively if you create an account to get notified that there is something coming up that you might be interested in, because ultimately I ain't got time to go through that website.
So I will
just to check that something's out there.
I'm more than happy to feed that back to BSI. And to be honest with you, I will be honest and say within the last couple of weeks, I have spoke to BSI about a few areas that could be improved on the site to make it easier. Because, like you say, it's all right for me. I get paid to do that thing all day long, but you guys are doing this in the middle of doing a job.
Yeah.
So BSI do actually send out bulletins in lots of different ways, and unfortunately, sometimes those bulletins lump together the developments of all standards. So in the electrotechnical sector, so if you ask for that, you might get a 50-page document saying these standards are up for some new work, these are the newly proposed standards, this is what's being updated, this is what's coming up for comment, this is what's coming up for being withdrawn.
What I would also say, Sam, is say it's an international document you're interested in keeping on, let's say Part 6 for instance, it'll have what's called a stability date. So that's the date that it's stable until it's the next review period, and then at the review period it'll be decided whether the document gets republished as it is, needs to go into maintenance and be rewritten. So
if you had a part that you were particularly interested in, you could effectively see how long that part is stable for, make a note of that, and then
yes.
I think I feel like I'm jumping all over you with this, but it would be great, I suppose, if you went into that and you could tick kind of the sections that you are interested in, so that if you're not in the rail industry or whatever it is, different industries, you didn't get notified on that. But if you were like myself, really interested in the renewable side, you got notified when things like this were coming out. Say, by the way, in 2 months' time or whatever, there's an amendment coming out or a corrigendum or whatever. To actually, you're going to be interested in this because it's relevant to the part that you've ticked. I think that would be really good.
Yeah. Well, the document that's I believe is still out for CDV at the moment is 712. Am I right in saying that, Graham? International 712, yeah. So you've still got an opportunity to get involved with that.
There we go. Well, there we are. So just to bring me back then to this question, we were talking before I took us slightly off the tracks there. We mentioned about someone proposes an amendment or something to consider. Now, do you have to look at who has proposed that amendment and take that into account when reviewing the kind of possible biases behind that, or do you have to review every single one that comes in?
To be honest, I mean, let's look at the comments that are made on the public comments that we get. What we tend to do with those is look at them in the committee managers can see who's made what comments, but when that goes to the committee, those are anonymised.
Right. So that's the comments on the
yes.
Come out.
So we don't want to be thinking about who's made the comment. We want to think about the technical merits of that. Whether it's a good thing or a bad thing to do, and rather than we're not naive. We understand that people may or may not suggest things. They may suggest things that makes things better or easier for them. They might suggest things are not implemented if it means that it'll change their job, make it more difficult, maybe cost you more money. There may very well though be some very good reasons that pop out of having the discussion on that. So we just look at each of the comments on its technical merit.
Right.
And it's obvious sometimes that people make comments and there is a reason for making that comment that isn't necessarily for the technical good.
Well, we'll have a mechanism.
But people are going to do that, aren't they?
We have spoke about the two main mechanisms, i.e. the regular maintenance cycle and the fact that anyone can submit a proposal at any time. But another thing that might instigate change within BS7671 is from time to time we receive coroner's reports.
Right.
So we're asked to look at those, and that might instigate a change.
Okay.
And occasionally, and it has happened, we'll receive a letter from a coroner, and there are certain letters from coroners that you legally just have to do what the coroner says.
And make changes that they say have to
absolutely,
be.
And that has happened as well.
Right. Okay. All right. So basically, from that, then you can never obviously stop somebody that has maybe a non-pure motive for suggesting an amendment, but you still have to look at that because there might be something that comes out of that non-pure motive that actually would improve things for many others, but you're also sometimes told or strongly suggested you have to make a change because of things like the coroner's coroner's reports or letters and
It
things.
doesn't happen often, but it does happen. You know, there are cases where we've received a coroner's letter that's a must-do. We've also received them where it's a suggested you look at.
So I guess if I was involved in the JPEL discussions and I put a proposal forward saying I want a regulation that says you can no longer use oval renewables in East Yorkshire, you have to use Powersonic, you would see through that as a committee straight away, and that kind of gets...
There are also, on top of that, there are also parts of BS0 that are there to prevent people driving forward their own IPR at the expense of the general good of business.
Right.
And so there are rules about that as well that we have to obey. We cannot do something, implement something that only one person or one organisation, one legal person, could benefit from as well. You know, and at the expense of others. We've got to be fair, and there are these rules of fairness written into BSI's rules.
Because that's some of the myths that are out there that we think, oh, manufacturers put that forward just to sell more products or whatever. But it doesn't work like that at a committee level because there's too many voices involved in that discussion for that to be a thing.
Definitely.
And, you know, I mean, you know, I've got to admit, you know, if you were to look at some of the things, and we're not allowed to always to, as I say, to provide the detail of discussions that have gone on. But if you didn't have that information, I can see why some people come to those conclusions occasionally.
But equally on that, who are the technical people that will best know if there is a problem with devices in these situations? Probably the manufacturers that are seeing this issue. So to kind of contradict my own question, or the question that was sent in, it's kind of like, well, yes, say like a manufacturer did, and I don't know that they did or they didn't, suggest this amendment, you kind of, I suppose, have to take on balance that they might be slightly biased, that they want to sell more different products, but also take it on the basis that they are probably the ones that are going to know that there is a problem with the devices operating with current flowing bidirectionally.
Well, I mean, don't forget that this is a two-way street, highlighting that there are issues with, or potential issues with certain products used in certain ways is a two-way street, isn't it? It's not easy for manufacturers if they are giving that advice. And I say BEMA did publish something. That's got to be well considered from their part, because people become suspicious why we're being told these things. But actually, you know, it's for the greater good, isn't it? You know, that's why BEMA published their guide, that they want to tell people how to install their products properly, so it doesn't lead to an issue.
So some of the core things around this particular amendment, just to speak about that in specific, seems to be to do with the way these devices are marked and how we kind of identify if they're bidirectional or not. And obviously, historically, looking back on stuff that's now installed when these regulations were in place, even though they maybe were loosely in a different place, you know, that's difficult for us as installers, isn't it? So I think the regulations setting that out is a good thing, because we want to be able to identify this.
But you only know what you know. You don't know what you don't know. The problem is that doesn't stop you falling into a trap that later on, you know, hopefully doesn't, but could end up in a situation where you're explaining to somebody why you decided to do what you wanted to do, maybe in a legal case or whatever, and that's not nice either. So, but you know, ignorance is no defence. But you know, so things like this are really intended to be helpful in that respect.
Yeah, I think a lot of my understanding that it was looking at this as terms of RCBOs, but Michael's mentioned off camera about this being MCBs as well. So there's misconceptions there that I've maybe got as well.
It's all protective devices. The first thing that I would like to clarify is we keep talking about bidirectional power flow, and I can see why. Don't get me wrong, we've got the term bidirectional protective device, but for me, forget all about bidirectional power flow. That to me is not the issue that we're concerned with here. What we're concerned with is a voltage being present on the load terminals after the device is tripped. That's the concern. And the reason for that is it depends on the construction of the protective device. All manufacturers do them differently, but the one that I've seen an example of, there's a thyristor and a solenoid in there. In the event of a fault, whether that be a residual current fault or somebody pressing the test button, a current's induced into the tripping coil, goes into the electronic box. Depending on the magnitude of that, it will probably more than 15 milliamps. It will probably decide to trip. The thyristor and the solenoid are what's called short time rated components. They're only designed to be live for long enough to trip that solenoid. The problem is the electronic box sends a signal to trip the solenoid. The device trips, but because of the voltage coming in on the load terminals, a thyristor, for those of you that don't know how a thyristor works, similar to a relay in that there's a coil to activate the contacts, if you like, but the thing with a thyristor is once you put a voltage on the gate and open the thyristor, the voltage will continue to go through the thyristor until there's no more left. So basically the thyristor and the solenoid in this instance, although in some manufacturers' products it might be a resistor or whatever, they're short time rated components and they'll stay live for as long as the source, whatever that may be, is generating, and that can burn out the components. So it's not necessarily to do with bidirectional, but what I would say is, the problem existed 20 years ago. If we had one of those devices with just one supply, if you'd have put the supply in the load terminals and the load in the line terminals, you'd still have the same problem. The reason it's more come to the front now is because we've got many more parallel supplies. So it was quite easy before. We had one line, one load. People, I'm sure, did get them the wrong way around, but it was quite difficult to. Whereas now, the electrician's faced with a problem. He's got a line and a line, and that's the problem.
I would also just say that it's more difficult to get it the wrong way around, or it was traditionally more difficult to get it the wrong way around in the UK because we use consumer units with bus bars. That's not the case for every country, as we know. If we go to some of our colleagues in Europe, they actually wire, instead of using the bus bar, they wire them in. And it might be easier in those situations to miswire it. Or if you have a single device in an adaptable box, which is permitted because it doesn't become switchgear and control gear assembly until you get more parts.
From my research, I'm not allowed to call them MCBs, by the way. I have to call them circuit breakers. So if I'm calling circuit breakers, I'm meaning MCBs, but my boss will shoot me if I call them MCBs. Okay. So from my research, circuit breakers do not have markings. There are odd exceptions to this, by the way. This is just a general rule. But from most of the popular manufacturers, circuit breakers don't have markings, therefore they're bidirectional. RCCBs don't have markings as in and out, but they do have markings for polarity. So L or N. So you'd have to remember that. RCBOs, I haven't found, well, most of them, single module compact RCBOs are unidirectional. And we've also got, as Mark said, moulded case circuit breakers, for those of you that are working on the bigger stuff. Now, it's a different issue with moulded case circuit breakers. Again, this issue's been about, or the potential issue has been about for many years, and a lot of people working on big switchgear will be aware of this. But if you've got say a moulded case circuit breaker that's rated at, say, 40 kiloamps, and you get the line and load terminals mixed up, if a fault of 40 kiloamp goes through that device, it will end up in catastrophic destruction. It will literally explode. So,
and that can be, if you get them in the wrong. You mentioned if you get them the wrong way around, that could be because you've got generation feeding that, or is it?
With a moulded case
I would be a bit more. I'd be just a little bit more cautious about the MCCB issue because. A small generator with not a lot of prospective fault current isn't going to necessarily lead to that particular issue. But if you had an MCCB in the wrong orientation and you had a supply changeover switch from one transformer to another for resilient power supply, then of course that is an issue, isn't it? So what you tend to find is that the MCCBs will be break before make on the changeover with the UPS to ride over anything that can't cope with the fraction of a second it's changing over. So you'll end up you'll see a lot of supply changeovers showing two breakers if you're using breakers for that changeover switch rather than just one.
So the issue we spoke about with RCBOs was due to the short time rated components. With a multi-case circuit breaker, it's different, and it's to do with the way that the arc's quenched within the device. It's designed to be quenched in a certain direction, and if the arc's quenched in another direction, it just doesn't have that capability.
So what's the solution to that? Is the solution to that a product that
You can
works
get the
differently?
right way round. You put your line in the line terminal and you load in the load.
Yeah.
So that's the thing when we're looking at that regulation in terms of putting this into a domestic environment. When you look at some of these bigger solar arrays at commercial scale, some of them get quite large, and the protected devices aren't necessarily going to be a small RCBO that you would have in a consumer unit. So it is the consideration of that. Maybe there is some innovation in products that will come to satisfy
What
that.
you'll find though is
fuses will still do the same
Well,
job
that's the
both
same.
ways.
They don't
that
care,
always
do they?
did.
A fuse is still the
long
best
as-
of a current protected device.
As long as if you open the fuse holder, it disconnects both ends of the fuse, which a lot do now. You know, particularly if you get the more expensive ones, they'll lift the fuse out at the bottom as well as well as opening it at the top. So, you know, but fuses work both ways, and they're still you're still able to use fuses and meet the requirements of BS7671.
I think the important thing here is to speak to the manufacturers. Some manufacturers will say, with multi-case circuit breakers specifically this is, some manufacturers will say their devices are bidirectional, you can connect it either way. Some will say there'll be directional arrows usually rather than supply and load on a multi-case circuit breaker.
It's really interesting that because we tend to be domestic as the company that I own, but looking more to go into some of the more commercial side of things, never even thought about that. Never even thought that there would be an issue with how that multi-case circuit breaker could disconnect that generation set. Obviously, like you mentioned, depending on the scale of it, it might not actually be that much of a problem. But as more big properties, big businesses look to go solar, I wonder how many of them are actually at threat of that, and it's not being spoken about, which is
If you see the image as well, it is very scary, to be quite honest with you.
yeah. I
You
don't
want to
want
be
to
the
see it.
person
You
who stood
definitely
next
won't
to
want to
it.
stood next to it, no.
No, there's so many avenues with all of this to dive down. I think it is important that we've cleared up the misconception around it's just you guys making this up to sell books. That it is actually for a purpose, isn't it? That's the ultimate reason. These things might cause a problem. There could be damage to an RCBO at a small single-phase domestic level that's maybe not picked up and it still resets. But then the RCD element of it is burnt to a crisp and no longer functioning, and we're trying to cover that off. Thinking back, Sam, to when you used to install this solar stuff back in the day. You don't look old enough to say back in the day. But we'll pretend you are. But the inverters back then would probably have stipulated they need 100 milliamp RCD protection or whatever in themselves. So they would have been put on these RCCBs with just the line and the neutral that needed identifying in the direction that they are, the polarity side of things. So you wouldn't be setting stuff up in the way we are now, where it's going on RCBOs because we're looking more at the cable installation method having RCD protection. There is the whole wider debate again that we mentioned with the inverter manufacturers and their built-in RCD element and the flow of energy from those, and then selectivity that can come to play a part. So there's other angles to all of that, but it's different, I think, now.
Yeah, I mean, things have come on massively. Like the biggest change for me was the whole. I remember us changing from the company I worked for from transformed inverters to transformerless, and then you've got the whole galvanic protection side of the changing that and getting these different RCDs, and then finding out that there's these RCM units in and all these different elements, and that's why ultimately I really love this industry because it changes so much. It's changed massively. I can't remember why we used to do it, but there was, and I hope I'm not dobbing in my old company, but I remember even fitting some earth rods and things for certain solar PV arrays. I can't remember why we did that. That was really early days, so I may be stitching them up there. But it changes so much. I think that's the big takeoff. The one thing that I wanted to just, it's my final bit really on on the reason for this amendment coming out is, through this conversation, I didn't have this thought really before this conversation, but through this conversation, it strikes me a little bit more that maybe this amendment is to possibly force manufacturers to change the product more than forcing the installers to choose the right one. Because you mentioned that this issue has been around of these short supply components. That issue has been around for ages. So actually having this in the regulations to actually say this has to be a bidirectional device. Do you think that's more to force them to do it?
No, because remember, this is an installation standard. If that was the case, we'd be talking about the product standard. We'd be doing that.
Yeah.
What this is for, Sam, is these are my words, but this is to, in my mind, we already had this regulation that we're proposing already in there, just a little bit more hidden. We've got regulation 134.1.1, which says we should take account of manufacturer's instructions. On the device, it says line and it says load. So all we're doing really is, because we realise that people sometimes don't understand what to do when they've got two lines, we're clarifying what was already there.
I think it's difficult, isn't it? Because you can try and comply with that as an installer, but not having the equipment necessarily available on the market to satisfy that.
No, I can't agree with that one, Sam, because the RCBOs, maybe not all manufacturers have a bidirectional RCBO, but we can use a circuit breaker in our CCB.
Yeah.
There's nothing, so we can't say the products haven't been on the market. It's just a different way of skinning a
It's
cat.
just not a combined one as such, really, I suppose, and it's that education. I suppose that's right. Yeah, I mean that's the way we've got around it actually before is MCB and circuit breaker and RCD that is just by its nature bidirectional. But equally, I remember early days in my subcontracting days when I went self-employed and getting kit sent out to a job by a solar company and it having RCBOs in the kit, and you kind of fit in those, and never even thought that wasn't.
Also, remember, some RCBOs are 2-module, they're bidirectional, and they've been around a long time.
Yeah, I think we just didn't. It wasn't advertised to us that that's what it was, I suppose.
Well, let's get out on the table a problem that is there for us is that we might have an existing consumer unit, and it may very well be that a single module device is not available for that consumer unit, and that does what we need for the renewables industry. Some of those products were made and put on the market well before we were even thinking about doing some of these things. So it's just part of the natural evolution for history. But one of the other things that we've got to remember is that we have a unique distribution system in the UK from respect to most of Europe, in that our prospective fault currents for domestic installations appear to be much higher. And that's because in a lot of built-up areas we have a really good electrical distribution system, and it's also quite resilient because there are still parts of towns that are still run on ring mains. Because a ring main being a distribution technique that allows you to divert power so that we can have a good continuity of supply. And so we're very lucky, but because of that, unfortunately, we have high prospective fault current. We have to take into account it might be up to 16,000 amps. So one of the national deviations for national conditions in 61439 is part 3, isn't it? The ordinary, basically the consumer unit standard, distribution boards for use by ordinary persons. All boards put on the market in the UK have to go through an extended test. And what it means is that the 6KA standard devices are still rated at 6KA, but the unit as a whole is tested so that it meets certain criteria, so that if you do happen on the very odd occasion that it might occur, you get a 16,000 amp fault, then at least something is survivable, and it's not going to burn your house down, more importantly. And so what that means is that because that assembly hasn't been tested with other manufacturers' breakers, you can't swap and change devices. And of course, that's why because some people might be wondering why can't we swap and change devices in the UK when clearly you go to other European countries or the CENELEC countries and they are doing that. Well, it's because there are special conditions of our supply that mean that a manufacturer wouldn't warrant their product will pass those tests in another manufacturer's board, and the board will survive with another manufacturer's product in it.
Of course, another thing that we have to consider while we're talking, I don't want to take us down this rabbit hole, by the way, just touch on it.
I am learning so much today, I tell you what.
While we're talking about installing PV in existing consumer units, in compact RCBOs, etc., something else we need to consider while we're thinking about that is I'm sure you've touched on this, the rated current of the assembly. So if we've got a 100 amp consumer unit and we're putting in a 16, board needs to be then rated at 116. So it might be a better solution to put your separate RCCB and MCB outside of the enclosure and feed it by a set of Henley blocks with an upstream 100 amp fuse.
This is a massive one. So I've actually...
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to take us down this rabbit hole.
To be honest, it's one that, I'm sure we could make about 4 parts to this podcast about all this stuff, and it's so interesting because I had a chat with I won't name the manufacturer, but I had a chat with a manufacturer that do a lot of boards yesterday about this exact thing, and I said to them, and there might be a deeper reason to this, but this is just my kind of coalface side looking at this as an electrician, that can we not just make boards 150 amp rated, 200 amp rated domestically, so that you can just feed stuff in? I know it'd be chunky bus bars and maybe more thermal testing and all of that, but is there a way we can do that to actually, so that when boards are being changed, they're already rated for...
You can already buy a Type A distribution board. I always used to fit, I won't say the manufacturer, but the manufacturer that I used to install a lot of, all their, admittedly, I wouldn't call them domestic equipment, it's more industrial really, but their Type A distribution boards are rated at 125 amp. So it's ready to go.
There's one.
Yes.
However,
Oh no.
It's question time for Sam now.
third edition of the Code of Practice for Electrical Energy Storage Systems does have some extended guidance now on different ways of achieving the don't overload the distribution board question. So there are some different things that you can do, and a couple, the easiest option, as Michael has said, is upfront protective device.
Just explain that one again then. So as like
if I have a 100 amp board, and I have two 32 amp, two 16 amp generators, then I could put a 63 amp fuse up front, and the total sum of what the generators are kicking out, plus the 63 amps I could pull from the grid, that would limit that, wouldn't it, to under 100 amps?
So you're talking 100 amp main fuse from the DNO supply, then a 63 amp fused isolator, and then from there splitting off to the home distribution board, and then a renewable distribution board that maybe has a 16 amp solar generator and a 16 amp battery.
Well, alternatively, another way of looking at this for domestic is that we split off with Henley blocks 100 amp straight into the home board for most of our heavy current using equipment. We then have our generator board, if you will, that provides our that has the 63 amp fuse in the way, and that will allow me to connect my vehicle to grid and my hybrid inverter. The question then comes to, how do we do island mode? What are we? And this all depends on how you want to arrange it. And the reason I say it depends on the topology. There's different approaches to this. Tesla's option is they go up front, and they can do whole house backup within certain limits. But they also have all the protective devices in there to make sure things aren't overloaded as well. Yeah. And they do all that within their kit that they provide you. So there's different approaches, and we're describing some different ways of achieving that.
A lot of the whole home backup systems are kind of setting that up by default. You have your normal household consumer unit and the gateway of sorts. It's the hybrid systems where it gets more complicated. And I think the 63 amp switch fuse in advance, and then you can have your generators going into that consumer unit, because the sum of all of that, like you say, is still under 100 amps, isn't it? So that's a good catch-all, actually, Graham. That's a really good tip. So
the difficulty with that, though, is when we're going more electric as properties, and you've got a car charger at 32 amps on its own, you've then got maybe a heat pump, another 40 amps, something like that, and we're all an electric hob, electric oven. You're miles on that 63 amps, so that, because I've I've explored that a little bit in my own mind.
So
And
what we need is you buy a pair of semis, yeah, both one pair, and you have all your switchgear and all your electrical plant in one side of the house, and you just live in the other.
It doesn't need to be 63 amps on. It can be 100 amps still.
Yeah, it could.
So
Yeah.
you could. So that's for the viewers. Let's just make this a little bit simpler to understand. So we've got the DNO fuse here, 100 amp. We're going to go into a set of Henley blocks. At the left of the Henley blocks, if you like, so it's easier to visualise. We're going to go to another 100 amp fuse, or it could be your main switch and your consumer unit. You could replace that for a 100 amp protective device, probably. There's another debate here whether you should be using a fuse or a circuit breaker. That's another rabbit hole, but I'd rather us not do that today. I'd rather us not. So then out of the left-hand side of the Henley blocks into your 100 amp fuse that you've installed, out of that to your consumer unit, out of the right-hand side of your Henley blocks, you go, as Graham said, you go to a little separate enclosure with maybe a bidirectional RCD or maybe an RCCB and an MCB in, and then you feed your PV generator from that side. And then the consumer unit, the generator isn't going into the consumer unit anymore, it is, but via the 100 amp fuse, so it can only pull 100 amps to that device.
So you've still got 100 amps for your main house?
You don't have to. I think when Graham gave an example of 63 amp, I think he was probably thinking selectivity.
Yeah.
We don't really have to consider selectivity with the DNO fuse as such, do we? We don't really care which one blows there, do we?
No, I think as well. I was thinking more that we are limiting then a home consumer unit that already has a lot of load to 63 amp from 100 amp, and that's a worry when you've got properties now with multiple electric vehicles.
Yeah, no, you can do it with 100 still.
The only reason I chose the 63 is that I know I've got a 100 amp board from most manufacturers. I want to use a 6-way board for my generators and one or two other bits and pieces to do with that. So all my generation comes in the generation board. I've got 32 amps, 100 amp total, and that's the only reason I chose 63.
Yeah. So we're effectively creating a cut-off from the generator and the house distribution board to make sure that they collectively can't be drawing more than 100 amps.
It's to make sure they go through the same overcurrent protective device. That's the problem, because if you didn't do it the way that I've just described, the 16 amps would go direct into the consumer unit and the grid supply would come through the 100 amp fuse, you see. So the 16 amps is bypassing the fuse, whereas the method that I've just described, the 16 amps has to go to the Henley blocks via the 100 amp protective device that you've installed.
Now, what we need to remember is that this covers all manner of sizes of electrical energy storage systems. It doesn't just cover domestic, and for that reason there are some particular issues that it's not necessarily easy to pull out of here what you might need for domestic installs. So we've just started work on a more sort of electrician's guide or on-site guide version of this that particularly pulls out some of the issues for domestic.
I think that's very much needed. I think that's a bit of guidance that's maybe missing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interpreting that for smaller or more simple installations, and I think that would be great, because again you get thrown into a course for this book, and
get it read to you for a day or two.
The examples out there, we say we don't want this to be limited, because it could very well be that this can be used in hospitals, and it wouldn't, you wouldn't have exactly the same considerations. But it doesn't make it easy for a lot of installers who are wanting to help people reduce their energy costs, which is, and to be fair, I do meet a lot of people. There are people I meet and say, well, it's a good money spinner, this, like solar was. But I meet other people that are really passionate about doing the job, and they want to help people keep their energy costs down. Yeah, you've got to make a crust, haven't you? But their motives are not just the money, and we want to help those people.
I think the reality is, kind of touching back on that point of the overloading of the consumer units, is that systems are growing in output now because of the progression of panels. Like, I remember it was literally a 3.68 kilowatt inverter back in the day, feed-in tariff, 16 panels, 250 watts, but now we're at like our minimum panel, I mentioned before, is like a 430 watt panel. So our minimum system is usually about 5 kilowatts. So you've gone from trickling in maximum about 16 amps into a property to now, just under 32 amps potential, and that's without, back in the feeding tech, they didn't have batteries as well, feeding that maybe, for prolonged periods. So, yeah, I mean, it's a really big thing to consider now, and probably a consideration moving away from having these solar and battery systems fed into the main distribution board of the property, and almost having to have a separate enclosure unless you fit something that can take the combined power, or you've got such a small demand on that property that actually even with the 32 amps of the solar, you're not getting above 100 amps, but then you probably wouldn't be fitting as big a system anyway.
It's difficult though, isn't it, in a domestic, if you're talking a commercial installation where you know the loads, etc., you could probably go down that road, but with a domestic installation, what is the load when you've got 10 socket outlets? It's very difficult, I think it is.
And how it changes with,
Occupiers.
New person moves in, 7 kilowatt EV charger, 32 amp heat pump goes in, and suddenly, I mean, that would, I suppose, be on the designer of that installation to take all that into account, but they're not going to. If there's a few spare ways, they're going to put it straight in.
There's so many areas
so
to dive down, isn't there? And I could talk to you guys all day, but obviously we're tied for time. I think in summary to this, I see that the regulations is really trying to help us as electricians have these products identified correctly, both when we're doing the ICRs in the future and the way we're specifying this right now. And manufacturers will meet that demand. They will come up with these bi-directional products that we need that are marked in the right way for us to install, and having that clearly put out in the regs will help push that to fruition. Because at the minute, what we've got at the minute is stuff that might be directional that we're installing but isn't marked in a way to identify it. We might then code that, another discussion again, as a C2 or something. They could then be replaced, and actually on their investigation they were bi-directional. We want our money back from you for making those changes, or they weren't and you didn't notice it. And then there's the other aspect to that. So having this, so we can understand what is in the board and what is needed, and manufacturers meeting that, I think that's a good thing.
I mean, don't forget, you made a good point there, but BS7671 doesn't set or provide any coding guidance. No. And so we'll be needing to look to our colleagues in the industry who publish that guidance to provide.
We'll ask Steve later, he can get some guidance out.
So I believe the discussions have already started at Electrical Safety First on this. So.
There you go. And to be fair, that IET do have representatives that are involved in some of those discussions as well. So we're not just in, the IET and its members are not just involved in what goes into BS7671, but of course, don't forget as well that a lot of the experts that put other industry guidance together published by other publishers, a lot of those are members of the IET as well, because it's a professional institution.
I'm not going to go into the coding as Graham's just said, but what it does say in the Beamer bulletin is if you find one of these on an existing installation, that proportionate action should be taken and you should contact the manufacturers. And I think that's the best advice, because each manufacturer knows their own product and whether it could become a safety issue or just something that's worthy of recommended improvement.
So one thing that we're really keen with this podcast is we are keen to be kind of the middle people, to have these really great conversations. And there's been a couple of topics here that we've had questions come in from you guys watching and listening, and through our social media accounts and things. And as that grows, we want more and more collaboration with everybody watching and listening to this. And just to cover off, because we've basically covered off another question that was sent out here. So the question was, if the regs come into force and the current wording shall, does it mean that, say, a car to grid or PV to grid that does not have a bidirectional RCBO fitted gets a C2 on an EICR or periodic inspection? On most EICRs, they are tested to the design spec of the time and not the current regulations. Is this new reg retrospective? But you kind of covered that.
Yeah, the regs are not retrospective, no. But what I would say is if you go to a protective device that's got a line connected into the load terminals, it's against the manufacturer's instructions. So
So it probably was against the regs at that time because of other regs that already exist.
Yes, it just wasn't as clear. I would
It's
say.
just been aware of it, I think, isn't it, as installers when you're going out. This is beyond just the solar sector. So if you do any ICRs and stuff and coming across this stuff, that's why it's important that it does get out there into the wider industry. It's why these discussions and the fact it has been brought out in the way it has is good because it is widespread. Lots of people are talking about it, and hopefully that education will get out there. I think that's really important. The other aspect to this, Graham, if I may, was the PASS document, because people think you wrote that. I just want to give you an opportunity to say that.
Hold on, before they say about Graham writing it, actually on one of the social media channels, the IET got the blame for it.
So, yeah, I mean, okay, yes, I did. What did I write? And why did I write it is, I suppose, the more pertinent question. Well, there is... just as there is BS0, there is PAS0, which tells you the rules for writing a publicly available spec, which is a faster way of getting a standard out there that the BSI have. The thing is that PAS0 has the same sorts of processes, procedures, and that kind of thing. So I wrote the consensus of the committee that was responsible. They're called a working group normally, I think, for PAS rather than a committee. And so I didn't just sit at home in my home office.
Yes, you did.
Thinking, how can I make people's lives more difficult? Because really, that's not the way it works. Yes, I put a set of headings together that I thought we ought to talk around when we started work. With some suggested topics in each of those things. But then what comes out of the discussions is a consensus, and then you start writing it. And why does it need somebody to write it? Well, as we talked about earlier, there's a language of standards. So you need somebody who, when they're writing requirements in standards, that they're written in a particular way. And if you're putting together a standard very quickly, you've got some experts that all have ideas that we get consensus about, but then you need somebody who has the experience of writing standards for many years to put all of those ideas down in the correct way.
There's a lot of that makes sense. I agree with most of what's in the PAS. I think lots of these things, we all have different views on it and want different bits to be in different ways, but largely speaking, I think it's a really good thing. I've got to be fair to you though, Graham, you've been out on the socials kind of making that point and defending it to some extent in some places where maybe some of the other contributors, without naming names, haven't been so forthright in that, and some of the things they've been sharing, kind of alluding to the fact that they might not have to follow this religiously or whatever, is a little bit unfair, and then everyone points the blame at you, basically, and it's not you. It's a committee and a group of people who've put something forward with best intentions to help safe installations.
I mean, don't forget as well, some of the points, again, it's an engineering discussion. Some of the points that have been made for and against things, they have their place. Some of those things may have already been discussed, but I'm not allowed to tell you.
No.
Yeah. What's all we know is that the consensus that has been reached is what is published there, and the names in the frame, the organisations that supported it, including the IET, did have representation separately, not through me, but through a different representative. They are all listed in the front of that PAS.
So just to clear up those two big points then, I know you said it's not all down to you, but for this purpose of this question it is.
You're getting the blame anyway, it sounds like.
You're getting the blame anyway, so I'm just feeding that.
No, go on.
Do we have to follow this?
So, standards are, for the most part, and I'll caveat that in a moment, but for the most part, standards are voluntary. The question is, do you have to follow BS7671? What makes you do that? Yeah, it's a good question. We are advised by the industry to follow BS7671 for the most part. the electricity safety, quality and continuity regulations is the only thing, the piece of legislation that really points you to say you should use BS7671, you have to use it. And that is in regulations 21 and 22 or of the England, Scotland and Wales, and 22 and 23 in the Northern Ireland version of the ESQCR, that where we have generators operating either in parallel with or as a switched alternative to the grid. So that's the only time in legislation that it says you shall use BS7671. Everywhere else, you're strongly advised to. Now, this PAS is industry guidance in the same way. It's an industry standard, and I guess if you didn't use it and something happened, you might expect questions.
So it's one of those things that now this is out there in the world, and something does happen from something being installed in a loft or whatever, something that isn't advised in the PAS document, you better know why you've gone against it. Whereas before, when it wasn't out there wasn't anything to kind of use against you.
It's a useful tool to use in your defence, I think, rather than to
equally,
prosecute you. You can say, I've done the best I can. This is what industry have put forward as best working practice, and I've done that.
Yeah.
We touched on that on the PAS episode, didn't we, where we said, look, these regulations and these documents are as much to help you as an electrician, and I know I feel this. Sometimes you feel that one day you can do something wrong and the regulator is going to put you in prison. It can actually keep you out of prison as well by you saying that you've used it as a kind of your best mate in that courtroom because you've followed it.
And remember, as Graham says, this is guidance, but what isn't guidance is the electricity at work regulations. And there's a nice little statement in the front there from the Health and Safety Executive that says, if you follow BS 7671, you're likely to achieve compliance with the electricity at work regulations.
And do we think that extends to this? Is there anything similar in the PAS side of things?
So the electricity at work regulations, of course, apply to workplaces and or electricians at work. Does the electricity at work regulations apply to a domestic electrical installation?
Find another rabbit hole now.
Good question. No, it's a good question. Does it apply? And the answer to that is the CDM regulations apply to all electrical work in most cases. And the CDM regulations require designers to consider that something has to be maintained safely. So if it's a provision that is there to protect the installer or maintainer, then electricity at work regulations applies to all electrical work, even in domestic. So when we're talking about provisions for isolation and safe working and so on, absolutely. Where the consumer protection side of things is a wholly different question. And you might not find out about whether you're going to get caught out with it or not until it comes to court. We really and truthfully, when we talk about interpreting standards and whether we should or shouldn't have used them, unfortunately, sometimes only a court will decide that when it's all too late.
Your viewers, I'm sure they've already downloaded BS0 already, and if they look in there, they'll see what Graham's just said is totally correct, and it says that there is only one person that can interpret a standard. There's two actually in my mind, but there's only one person, and that's a judge in a court of law, and obviously the user of the standard. So when people call like the IET technical helpline and say, what does this mean? Unfortunately, I have to give the answer. I'll help as much as I can, but I can't interpret it for them. That's their job, or a judge in a court of law, unfortunately.
I'm going to have to listen back to this podcast.
It's been a brilliant
Even experts in a court, of course, will give an opinion, their opinion, and the judge will consider that opinion, or those opinions if there's more than one expert that's providing an opinion on a particular topic. So, we can't overreach. You can't ask me what will happen if I don't use the PAS. Really, I cannot overreach that. Only after something has sadly gone wrong and there's a court case, or if there is a claim going on in a larger construction. So you sign up to any relevant standards in force at a certain date to do a job on 40 houses, new build houses. and somebody comes along towards the end of the job and says, you're not compliant with PAS 63100, and you say, well, you didn't tell me you wanted it. Well, you signed up to say, standards in force on this date in May 2025, and that was published in April, and again, that's something for you to sort out with your contracts guys and the claims lawyers if they get involved.
I think the really quick last one for me was that does this PAS document get altered, changed, or is that kind of what's down in writing now? Is it a bit like this where you get, because I'll be honest, this PAS document has been the first I've even ever heard of PAS, to be honest.
So I think I want to make a statement about it first of all. Actually, that I do tutor courses, and I teach the LCL awards for battery storage systems for a particular provider. And when we're talking about where should we install batteries, quite often people on that course say to me, why can't we have something that tells us where we shouldn't put them? So we do now. And it takes away some of the things that we debate as to good and bad places to put batteries. Some of that's cut through a little bit now, and we wished for something, and it's there. So that's why.
Be careful what you wish for.
It comes back to you're damned if you do and damned if you don't.
Absolutely. Now, does the PAS then get updated and that kind of stuff? Well, like all standards, they are subject to review. If it's found that if somebody reports an issue with the standard, it's looked into. If it's found that there was an error, there could be a corrigendum or an amendment to it. And then there is a maintenance cycle where it will be reconfirmed, turned into a British standard, or withdrawn.
Okay.
It's interesting. I've learned such a lot chatting to you two guys. It's been an absolute honour to be honest. And I just want to say to the people listening, Michael has kindly given us the code of practice here that we want to give away to one of you guys and girls who are watching. So if you've got any comments around this episode, wherever you're watching it, I'll keep an eye on where these are all placed. Drop them in below and we'll have a little look through in a week's time or so after this is aired and pick someone out to send this off to you. So very kind of you, Michael. Thanks for doing that.
No problem.
I'm going to photocopy it first.
Yeah, me too. Get us 2 copies.
I didn't hear that.
Is there anything else that anyone would like to add to the discussion? I'm done on this one. I think it's been brilliant.
I have learned so much on this. So the only thing I want to say is thank you both for giving up your time. I know you're both really busy and you've travelled from multiple different places. So I really, really do appreciate it. And I hope everybody has found the same value that me and Mark have found in this, because it's so rare to get these sort of conversations. And one thing that we set out in our very first episode is that we wanted to kind of break through the airlock between people that write standards, manufacturers that make products, installers that install them, customers that buy them, and try and get everyone talking about this stuff, because ultimately you can't act on something that you don't know about, and you can't contribute to something that you don't know how to contribute, or even that it's around. So for me, these conversations are awesome, and we'll see you next week for the next episode.
No, I'd echo that. Thank you, guys.
No, thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely, no, thank you. Well, I've got to get back, haven't I, to making up some more problems for people.
We just got you off the hook, great.
No, thank you. I've really enjoyed speaking to everybody. Thank you.
Yeah.
On that note, if you've got any comments, please do drop them in below as always. We'll look through them. We really appreciate the feedback. And we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you very much.